Okay, let's dive right in. The 2026 State of the Union was, well, it was a lot. Clocking in at a record-breaking 1 hour and 48 minutes, it was this marathon of partisan moments, really divided reactions, and some pretty wild claims. On the surface, it just looked like pure chaos. But what if there was a method to the madness?
This one line, right here, pretty much sums up the entire night. It's a statement that pulls in two totally opposite directions at the same time, right? I want peace, but also, I'm ready for a fight. And this wasn't just some throwaway line. It was a theme that kept popping up over and over again.
And that really gets us to the big question we're tackling here. If you strip away all the political theater, all the noise, can you actually find a consistent strategic doctrine hiding in plain sight? I think you can. So let's try and break it down into 3 core pillars.
Okay, so the first pillar basically throws out the old playbook of international relations. It stops looking at the world through the lens of diplomacy and instead sees everything through a corporate, almost brutally transactional viewpoint. Let's call it the state-merchant paradigm.
So what does this actually look like in the real world? Well, in this model, every single relationship, every treaty, every alliance is, at its heart, a deal. It's not judged on shared values or history, but on its tangible return on investment. Its bottom line, its profit and loss for the U.S.
And this is a perfect example of that idea in action. The way the president talked about NATO wasn't about collective security or shared destiny. No, it was about getting the customers to pay up. The alliance is treated less like a historic pact and more like a service agreement where the other members are just delinquent on their bills.
And this way of thinking, it doesn't just stop with alliances. It carries right over into economic policy. You heard the president talk about tariffs, not as some complex economic tool, but as a simple revenue stream, like a direct payment from other countries right into the bank. The nation is the business, and tariffs are just income. But this is where the doctrine starts to run into trouble.
Because, as the AP's live fact-checkers were pointing out during the speech, economists are pretty much all in agreement. The cost of tariffs is paid by U.S. companies and eventually by us, the consumers. This clash, this friction between the state-merchant story and cold, hard economic facts is a really critical part of how this doctrine plays out.
All right, so let's move on to the second pillar, and you'll see how these ideas build on each other. This part is about a major shift in the reason for foreign intervention. It moves away from big ideas like spreading democracy and focuses squarely on getting control of strategic resources.
Just look at the recent intervention in Venezuela. It's a textbook case. The speech laid out this incredibly fast, decisive military operation. And what came next? Not talk about nation-building or democracy, but immediate negotiations for a new economic deal. The goal was clear and resource-focused from day one.
And the president's own words tell the story. The whole thing is framed in terms of extraordinary economic gains. The humanitarian part, the new hope for the people, that's presented as a happy byproduct of the economic deal, not the main reason for going in.
And that brings us to our third and final pillar, which is probably the most confrontational one. It's this idea that overwhelming military power isn't just for defense, it's actually your #1 negotiating tool. In this view, you don't use diplomacy to avoid using your strength, you use your strength to get the diplomatic outcome you want.
You can see this in bright, flashing lights with the Iran situation. In the speech, you hear the language about preferring a diplomatic solution, but at the exact same time, what's happening on the ground? A massive military buildup. And in this doctrine, those two things aren't contradictory. The military pressure is seen as the very thing that will force a diplomatic deal.
And this reveals a really crucial disconnect. The administration claims Iran won't say the secret words, that they won't promise to never have a nuke. But that's directly contradicted by years of public statements from Iranian officials. It suggests the negotiation isn't really about what's being said at a table, it's about the leverage being created by that massive naval force just offshore.
So, what happens when you put all three of these pillars together? What you get is a fundamental shift in how the world works. It's a move away from the predictable, rules-based system we've known for decades and towards something completely new and a whole lot less certain.
A key feature of this new landscape is something we could call cracking gears. It's that grinding, friction-filled noise you hear when this top-down, CEO-style doctrine slams into the brick wall of reality, whether that's economics, the courts, or just verifiable facts. We saw it with tariffs, and we saw it with the Iran negotiations.
So, to just quickly recap, what we've pulled out of the chaos of that long speech is a surprisingly clear 3-part doctrine. You've got a nation run like a business,
a foreign policy that's all about resources, and a style of diplomacy that's backed by overwhelming military leverage.
And the end result of all this is what you could call a regime of uncertainty. It's a world where long-term alliances and international rules take a back seat to short-term transactional wins. And this matters because it completely rewrites the playbook for how nations deal with each other.
And that leaves us with one final, and I think really important, question to think about. In this new world we're seeing emerge, one that's governed by deals instead of doctrines, and transactions instead of treaties, what actually becomes the true measure of a nation's strength? What does it even mean to be powerful anymore?